close your eyes and imagine, if you will, what it might feel like to be born into a destiny you never chose. To open your eyes for the first time and already carry the weight of an ancient hatred that predates your existence by millennia. To be told, perhaps not in words, but in the very fabric of your being, that you are meant to destroy, to conquer, to become darkness incarnate. This is the story of Ganondorf, the king of the Gerudo, the bearer of the Triforce of Power, the Demon King. But more than that, this is the story of a man trapped in a cycle he cannot break, bound by chains forged before the world as we know it even existed. It's the story of someone who reaches for freedom again and again, only to find that each grasp brings him deeper into the very prison he seeks to escape. In the quiet hours of night, when sleep softens the boundaries between dream and memory, let us walk through the sands of the Gerudo Desert together. Let us trace the steps of a king who was born beneath a curse so profound that it would echo through countless lifetimes, manifesting in resurrection after resurrection, defeat after defeat, each one a note in an endless, sorrowful song. The Legend of Zelda series has given us many villains, but none quite like Ganondorf. Where others fade into obscurity after their defeat, he returns again and again, wearing different faces, carrying different powers, but always bound to the same terrible purpose. He is not merely reborn, he is recreated, reformed, resurrected, an incarnation of hatred that precedes even his own existence. But what does it mean to be the incarnation of someone else's hatred? What does it mean to wake each time from death or seal or stone, knowing that your purpose has already been written? What does it mean to desire something as simple as freedom, when the gods themselves have ordained your imprisonment within a cycle of eternal conflict? These questions swirl through the winds that blow across Hyrule, the same winds that once brought death to the Gerudo Desert, the same winds that Ganondorf coveted, the same winds that finally brought him peace in his final moments atop that tower in the Great Sea. To understand Ganondorf's curse, we must first understand the origin of that curse, a moment that occurred before Ganondorf himself was ever born. The curse begins not with Ganondorf, but with a being known as Demise, the Demon King, the source of all monsters, an entity that conquered time itself. In the age before Hyrule, before the kingdom was even a dream, Demise waged war against the goddess Hylia for possession of the Triforce, that sacred relic left behind by the golden goddesses Din, Nehru, and Furore. In the Legend of Zelda, Skyward Sword, we witness not just the defeat of this ancient evil, but the birth of a curse that would shape every conflict to follow. When Link, the hero of the sky, finally struck down Demise in that otherworldly dimension beyond time and space, the Demon King did not simply accept his defeat. In his final moments, with the Master Sword piercing his chest and his form beginning to dissolve into particles of light, Demise spoke words that would resonate through the ages. The English localization of Skyward Sword presents these words with dramatic weight. Demise tells Link that his hatred never perishes, that it is born anew in a cycle with no end. He promises that he will rise again, that those who share the blood of the goddess and the spirit of the hero are eternally bound to this curse, and that an incarnation of his hatred shall ever follow their kind, dooming them to wander a blood-soaked sea of darkness for all time. These words are not merely a villain's parting threat. They are a fundamental reshaping of reality itself, a curse woven into the very fabric of existence within the world of Hyrule. Demise's final act was not destruction, but creation, the creation of an eternal cycle from which there could be no escape. Interestingly, the Japanese version of this speech carries slightly different nuances. Rather than explicitly stating that he will personally be reborn, Demise speaks more broadly about the nature of hatred itself and how it perpetuates through cycles of violence and revenge. The original Japanese text suggests that the cycle continues not just because of Demise's malice, but because hatred begets hatred, because violence answered with violence creates an unending spiral. In this interpretation, both the forces of light and darkness contribute to the cycle's continuation. But regardless of which translation we follow, the result is the same. From that moment forward, the land that would become Hyrule was bound to an eternal pattern. The goddess would be reborn in the bloodline of Zelda. The hero's spirit would be reborn in champions named Link. And the hatred, the seething malevolence that Demise embodied, would be reborn in a man named Ganondorf. This is where we must pause and consider something profound. Ganondorf is not technically Demise reincarnated. The Hyrule Historia, Nintendo's official chronicle of Zelda lore, clarifies that Ganondorf is an incarnation rather than a true reincarnation. The distinction matters. A reincarnation would imply that Demise's soul directly inhabits Ganondorf's body. An incarnation suggests something more complex and perhaps more tragic, that Ganondorf is his own person, but one shaped and molded by forces beyond his control to embody characteristics and purposes that mirror the original Demon King. Ganondorf is born with his own mind, his own desires, his own capacity for choice. But hovering over every decision is the shadow of Demise's curse, pushing him toward darkness, toward conflict, toward the role he was cursed to play before he drew his first breath. It's a subtle distinction, but it transforms Ganondorf's story from one of simple villainy into something approaching tragedy. Consider what this means on a practical level. Somewhere in the Gerudo Desert, perhaps during a night when the frigid winds howled between the canyon walls, a child was born. This child, like all male Gerudo born once every 100 years, was immediately marked as special, immediately given the mantle of kingship. But this particular child carried something else, an invisible mark, a destiny written in hatred, a purpose that had been waiting for thousands of years to manifest once more. Did baby Ganondorf cry that first night, sensing somehow the weight of what was to come? Did the twin witches Kome and Kotake, who served as his surrogate mothers, notice something different about this boy, something in his eyes that suggested depths of power and darkness beyond normal ken? The games never tell us these details, leaving them to drift in the realm of imagination, but they seem important when we consider the full scope of Ganondorf's existence. The curse that binds Ganondorf is not one of possession or control in the traditional sense. It's more insidious than that. It's a curse of purpose, of inevitability, of a destiny that pulls at him like gravity, making certain choices feel natural while others seem impossible. It's the curse of being born into a story that was written long before you existed, of looking ahead and seeing only one path forward even as you desperately search for another. Throughout the Zelda series, we see Ganondorf make choices, express desires, show moments of reflection, and even regret. These moments are real. They matter. But they exist within the framework of Demise's curse, bounded by its parameters, shaped by its inexorable pull toward conflict with those who carry the blood of the goddess and the spirit of the hero. This is Ganondorf's fundamental prison, not a cell of stone or magic, though he will experience plenty of those, but a prison of destiny itself. Before we explore his many defeats, his various resurrections, his moments of power, and his periods of sealed imprisonment, we must understand this. Every step Ganondorf takes is a step within a maze that was constructed before he was born. Every choice he makes is a choice from a menu of options that Demise's curse has already limited. And yet, as we will see, there are cracks in this curse. There are moments when Ganondorf seems to glimpse something beyond it, when he reaches for a freedom that might exist outside the cycle. These moments are fleeting, often coming only at the very end, only as death finally claims him in one timeline or another. But they exist, and they matter, because they suggest that even within the tightest prison, even within a curse that spans millennia, the desire for freedom never quite dies. The origin of hatred, Demise's legacy. To truly understand the chains that bind Ganondorf, we must descend deeper into the ancient past, to a time before Hyrule existed as a kingdom, before the Master Sword had been forged, before even the land itself had settled into the shape we recognize. We must travel to an age when the surface world was still young, when the goddess Hylia walked among the people she protected, and when a darkness stirred beneath the earth. The story begins in Skyward Sword, chronologically the first game in the Zelda timeline. But even this beginning is itself the middle of a longer story. Long before Link of Skyloft ever picked up his sword, before Zelda revealed herself to be the mortal form of the goddess, there was a war. The earth cracked wide, we are told, and malevolent forces rushed forth from the fissure. These were not ordinary monsters or simple evildoers. These were demons, creatures of pure malice, led by the being who had conquered time itself, Demise. Demise himself is shrouded in mystery. The companion Fi, the spirit within the Master Sword, describes him as an eternal being, one who appears differently in each epoch and to each person who lays eyes upon him. This detail is fascinating and troubling in equal measure. It suggests that Demise is not merely a powerful demon, but something more fundamental, perhaps an embodiment of evil itself, taking whatever form is necessary to manifest in each age. When we finally confront Demise in Skyward Sword, we see him as an imposing figure with flaming red hair, wielding a massive sword, radiating power and confidence. His physical appearance deliberately mirrors what Ganondorf will become. The red hair, in particular, serves as a visual connection between the ancient Demon King and his later incarnation. The Hyrule Historia explicitly notes that Ganondorf's flaming red hair is meant to signify his connection to Demise. But Demise's war was not primarily one of appearance or simple conquest. Demise sought the Triforce, the sacred golden triangles created by the golden goddesses as they departed the world after its creation. The Triforce represented ultimate power, the ability to grant any wish, to reshape reality itself according to the desires of whoever touched it. Left in the care of the goddess Hylia, it became the focal point of Demise's ambitions and the reason for his assault upon the surface world. The war between Hylia and Demise was long and devastating. The goddess fought with everything she had, marshalling the 5 remaining tribes who dwelt upon the surface: the Gorons, the Mogma, the Parella, the Kikwi, and the ancient robots. But Demise's power was overwhelming. His demons burned forests to ash, choked the land's sweet springs with poison, and murdered without hesitation. It became clear that a conventional victory was impossible. So Hylia made a desperate choice. She took the remaining humans, the ones who would become the Hylians, and placed them on a piece of land that she then lifted into the sky, far above the clouds, hiding them and the Triforce away from Demise's reach. Then, in a final confrontation, she used all her divine power to seal Demise away, reducing him to a weakened but still monstrous form that would later be known as the Imprisoned. This seal cost Hylia everything. To ensure that Demise would eventually be defeated permanently, she gave up her divinity and arranged to be reborn as a mortal girl who would help guide a chosen hero to forge a weapon capable of destroying the Demon King forever. That girl would be Zelda. That hero would be Link. And that weapon would be the Master Sword. Thousands of years later, when Link of Skyloft finally fulfilled this destiny, striking down Demise with the completed Master Sword in a realm beyond time, it should have been the end. The Demon King should have simply ceased to exist, his dark spirit sealed away within the blade to decay and fade into nothingness. But Demise had one final move to make. The moment itself is stark and memorable. After his defeat, with Link standing victorious and the Master Sword's blade still glowing with sacred power, Demise speaks. In the English localization, his words come slowly, each syllable weighted with significance. He calls Link extraordinary, a paragon among his kind, acknowledging the hero's skill even in defeat. But then the tone shifts. Though this is not the end, Demise says, my hate never perishes. It is born anew in a cycle with no end. I will rise again. He points at Link with one clawed finger, the gesture both accusatory and prophetic. Those like you, those who share the blood of the goddess and the spirit of the hero, they are eternally bound to this curse. An incarnation of my hatred shall ever follow your kind, dooming them to wander a blood-soaked sea of darkness for all time. These words hang in the air like a funeral bell. They are delivered without accompanying music, with almost no sound effects, creating a moment of pure, crystalline clarity. This is not just a threat or a promise of eventual return. This is something more fundamental, a curse that restructures reality itself. The implications of this curse are staggering. From this moment forward, every conflict in Hyrule's history carries Demise's fingerprints. Every time darkness rises to threaten the land, every time a hero must take up arms against evil, every time Princess Zelda must use her power to hold back malevolent forces, all of it traces back to this moment, to these words, to this curse. But let us examine the curse more carefully, because its exact nature matters tremendously when considering Ganondorf's position within it. Demise does not say, I will return, or my spirit will possess a new host. The language is more subtle. He speaks of an incarnation of his hatred, something that will embody his malevolence, but may not necessarily be him in a literal sense. This distinction becomes clearer when we examine the Japanese version of this speech, which has been analyzed by fans and translators alike. In the original Japanese text, Demise's words carry different connotations. Rather than explicitly placing all blame on himself and his hatred, the Japanese version suggests that the cycle of conflict continues because hatred itself, on both sides, perpetuates violence. When mortals respond to hatred with more hatred, when they fight darkness with the same fury that darkness brings to them, they contribute to the cycle's continuation. In this interpretation, Demise's curse is less about him personally haunting Link and Zelda's descendants, and more about him recognizing and codifying a truth about the nature of conflict. That violence begets violence, that hatred breeds more hatred, and that once such a cycle begins, it becomes nearly impossible to break. The curse, then, is not just Demise's doing. It's maintained by everyone who participates in it, by every act of revenge, by every response that mirrors the initial violence. This reading of the curse adds layers of complexity to Ganondorf's situation. If the curse is partially maintained by the responses to it, then Ganondorf's role becomes even more tragic. He is not just an incarnation of ancient hatred, he is also a victim of how others respond to that incarnation. Every time he is sealed away rather than forgiven, every time he is executed rather than redeemed, every time he is treated as an inevitable evil rather than a person capable of choice, all of these responses feed back into the cycle, strengthening the very curse they seek to break. The curse also raises profound questions about predestination and free will. In Ganondorf's world, the future is not merely predicted or foretold. It is actively shaped by forces beyond any individual's control. Demise's curse ensures that certain patterns will repeat. There will be a princess with divine blood. There will be a hero with unbreakable courage. And there will be a manifestation of Demise's hatred seeking to conquer the kingdom and claim the Triforce. But here's where things become philosophically murky. Does the curse force Ganondorf to be evil, or does it simply make evil the path of least resistance? Does it eliminate his free will entirely, or does it just heavily constrain his options? These questions have no clear answers in the games themselves, but they're crucial to understanding Ganondorf's tragedy. Consider this. Throughout the series, we see Ganondorf make specific choices. He chooses to feign loyalty to the King of Hyrule in Ocarina of Time. He chooses to pursue the Triforce through manipulation and betrayal. In Twilight Princess, he chooses to use Zant and the Twilight for his own purposes. In Tears of the Kingdom, he chooses to murder Queen Sonia and steal her secret stone. These are not automatic actions. They require planning, strategy, and deliberate decision-making. Yet at the same time, all these choices flow in the same direction, toward conflict with Hyrule, toward seeking the Triforce or similar sources of ultimate power, toward opposing Link and Zelda. It's as if Ganondorf has free will within a narrow corridor, able to choose how to fulfill his role, but not whether to fulfill it at all. He can decide tactics, but not strategy. He can choose methods, but not purpose. This is the insidious nature of Demise's curse. It doesn't need to control Ganondorf like a puppet to be effective. It simply needs to make certain paths feel natural, certain desires feel overwhelming, certain conflicts feel inevitable. The curse works not by removing choice, but by stacking the deck so thoroughly that the choice becomes meaningless. We see hints of this throughout Ganondorf's appearances. In Wind Waker, the older, more reflective Ganondorf speaks of coveting the wind that blew across Hyrule's green fields, suggesting that his initial motivation was desire rather than pure evil. In Twilight Princess, we see him manipulate and betray others, but we also see him acknowledge the cyclical nature of his conflict with Link and Zelda, as if he understands he's caught in something larger than himself. There are even moments when Ganondorf seems to recognize the curse's presence. His final words in Twilight Princess, before he succumbs to his wounds, speak of history being written in blood, and hint at future battles between his reincarnation and Link and Zelda's descendants. He knows, on some level, that this isn't the end. He knows the cycle will continue. And there's something almost weary in that knowledge, a suggestion that even Ganondorf grows tired of the eternal struggle. But perhaps the most tragic aspect of Demise's curse is this. It robs Ganondorf of the one thing that might have allowed him to escape it, a genuine chance at a different path. When people look at Ganondorf, they don't see a person with potential for growth or change. They see the inevitable return of an ancient evil. They see a role that must be filled, a prophecy that must be fulfilled, a battle that must be fought. This becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because everyone expects Ganondorf to be evil, because the curse marks him as the enemy from the moment of his birth, no one ever extends him the hand that might pull him out of the cycle. No one offers him a place in Hyrule's prosperous lands without conquest. No one seeks to understand the harsh conditions of the Gerudo Desert or help his people. Instead, they wait for him to betray them, and when he inevitably does, pushed by circumstance, by the curse, by the weight of everyone's expectations, they say, "We knew he would do this." And so the curse continues, generation after generation, incarnation after incarnation, each time seeming to prove itself true, each time making itself more inevitable. Demise's greatest triumph was not in his power or his conquest, but in creating a curse so insidious that it would perpetuate itself through the very attempts to stop it. This is the legacy that Ganondorf inherits. This is the shadow cast over his entire existence. Before he ever makes a choice, before he ever commits a crime, before he ever raises his hand against Hyrule, he is already doomed by a curse that precedes him by thousands of years. And yet, as we will see, even within these constraints, even within this seemingly inescapable prison, Ganondorf will reach for freedom. He will grasp at power not just for its own sake, but as a means of escaping the cycle. He will seek the Triforce not just for conquest, but for the ability to rewrite his own fate. The question that haunts his entire story is whether such freedom is even possible, whether anyone can escape a curse woven into the very fabric of reality itself. But before we can explore that question, we must first meet the man himself, born into the harsh sands of the Gerudo Desert, crowned as king before he could walk, marked by destiny before he could understand what that meant. Born into destiny. The Gerudo King. The Gerudo Desert stretches endlessly beneath a merciless sun, its sands shifting like waves frozen in stone and gold. By day, the heat is enough to sear the lungs of the unprepared. By night, when the moon climbs into the velvet darkness of the sky, a frigid wind cuts through layers of cloth and leather, seeking the warmth of any living thing and stealing it away grain by grain. This is a place where life clings desperately to existence, where water is more precious than gold, where death rides on every wind. And into this harsh and beautiful land, once every 100 years, a boy is born. The Gerudo are unique among Hyrule's peoples. They are a tribe of warriors, all women save for that single male born once per century. Tall and strong, with copper skin kissed by the desert sun, and fierce eyes that reflect both the warmth of their bonds and the harshness of their environment, they have thrived in conditions that would break lesser peoples. They are thieves and warriors, yes, but they are also mothers and daughters, sisters and friends, a close-knit community forged in the crucible of their unforgiving homeland. The birth of a male child in Gerudo culture is not merely a rare occurrence, it is a transformative event. According to their ancient traditions, that boy is destined to become their king, not through conquest or selection, not through proving his worth or demonstrating his wisdom, but simply by virtue of being born. The moment he draws his first breath, he becomes the ruler of his people, the voice that speaks for the Gerudo, the figure around which their entire society reorganizes itself. Imagine what this means for the child. Before he can form words, he bears a crown. Before he can understand what leadership means, he is expected to lead. Before he has lived even a single day in the desert that will shape his entire worldview, he is named its king. When Ganondorf was born, and we speak here of the first Ganondorf, the one who appears in Ocarina of Time, though his birth echoes through other incarnations, the Gerudo rejoiced. After 100 years without a male leader, after 100 years of matriarchal rule and decisions made in council, they had their king. The twin witches, Kume and Kotake, powerful sorceresses who had long served as guardians and advisors to the Gerudo, took the child under their protection, raising him as their surrogate son. What was Ganondorf's childhood like? The games give us only hints, fragments from which we must construct the larger picture. We know from Nabooru, one of the Gerudo warriors in Ocarina of Time, that Ganondorf was not universally beloved even among his own people. She speaks of refusing to follow him because he stole from women and children, because he murdered people, suggesting that even within Gerudo culture, which valued strength and could be ruthless in its practicality, there were lines that should not be crossed. This tells us something important. Ganondorf's path toward darkness was not instantaneous or inevitable in the eyes of his own people. There was a before and an after, a time when he might have been different, and a point at which he crossed a threshold. But what pushed him across that threshold? Was it purely Demise's curse, an inexorable pull toward malevolence? Or was it something else? The pressure of leadership thrust upon a child, the grinding poverty and harshness of desert life, the knowledge that just beyond his people's borders lay green fields and flowing water that might ease their suffering if only he were strong enough to take them. The Gerudo Desert is not merely harsh. It is a place that seems actively hostile to human life. The very air shimmers with heat in the day, creating mirages that promise water where none exists. The nights, which should bring relief, instead bring a cold so penetrating that it feels like death itself seeping into your bones. The wind, whether hot or cold, carries the same message. This place does not want you here. Growing up in such an environment shapes a person in profound ways. You learn that comfort is temporary, that safety is an illusion, that life is something you must fight for with every breath. You learn to be hard because softness means death. You learn to take what you need because waiting politely for someone to give it to you means watching your people suffer. You learn that the world is divided into those who have and those who must take, and you learn which category your people occupy. But just beyond the desert's edge lies Hyrule, the kingdom founded by the royal family, blessed by the goddesses, protected by the Triforce. Hyrule, with its green fields and flowing rivers, its abundant harvests and prosperous cities, its people who have never known the bone-deep desperation of wondering if this year's water will last until the next rain. Hyrule, where children grow up without learning that the wind can kill, where the greatest concern might be which festival to attend, rather than whether you'll survive the night. To a young king of the Gerudo, watching his people struggle in the desert while Hyrule prospers, what would such a sight inspire? Envy, certainly, and anger. But perhaps also a sense of injustice. Why should the Hylians have so much, while the Gerudo have so little? What divine providence decided that some should live in paradise while others cling to survival in a wasteland? And if the goddesses truly blessed Hyrule at the expense of other peoples, then what loyalty did those peoples owe to such capricious deities? These are dangerous thoughts, the kind that can lead a person down dark paths. But are they unreasonable thoughts? Is it evil to look at inequality and feel anger? Is it malevolent to want better for your people? This is where Demise's curse becomes so insidious, because it takes legitimate grievances and natural desires and bends them toward cruelty and conquest rather than toward cooperation and justice. A young Ganondorf, raised on stories of his people's struggles, taught magic by the twin witches who served as his mothers, crowned as king before he could understand what that meant. This boy carried the weight of an entire nation's hopes and resentments. Every hardship his people endured reflected on his leadership. Every child who suffered from heat or thirst or hunger did so under his rule. And all of it while Hyrule's prosperity mocked them from across the desert's edge. The twin witches Kome and Kotake certainly influenced Ganondorf's development. These powerful sorceresses, who could command fire and ice respectively, who could combine their magic into devastating attacks, who had likely served the Gerudo for generations beyond counting. They shaped the young king's understanding of power. From them, he learned sorcery, the manipulation of dark forces, the ways in which magic could be used to achieve what strength alone could not. But what else did they teach him? Did they tell him stories of ancient Gerudo glory? Did they whisper in his ears about past injustices, about times when the Gerudo might have ruled rather than survived? Did they, perhaps unknowingly, help guide him toward the very darkness that Demise's curse required of him? We must remember that Kume and Kotake also appear to be bound to Ganondorf across multiple lifetimes. In Four Swords Adventures, they appear again, hundreds of years after Ocarina of Time, serving another incarnation of the Demon King. This suggests they too might be caught in the curse's web, playing their role in ensuring that each incarnation of Ganondorf has the guidance and power needed to fulfill his dark destiny. As Ganondorf grew from child to youth to man, he would have taken on more and more responsibilities as king. The Gerudo, despite their fierce independence, looked to their king for direction. They followed him into battle, obeyed his commands, accepted his vision for their future. And according to Ocarina of Time, Ganondorf's vision involved more than mere survival in the desert. The gossip stones scattered throughout Hyrule speak of Ganondorf's ambitions even before his betrayal becomes obvious. They say he is not satisfied with ruling only the Gerudo, that he aims to conquer all of Hyrule. This is presented as villainous ambition, naked conquest for its own sake. But from Ganondorf's perspective, might it not look different? If ruling only the Gerudo means watching them suffer in the desert, while ruling Hyrule would mean having the resources to ease their burden, is the desire for conquest purely evil? This is not to justify what Ganondorf does, the betrayal, the murder, the cruelty that marks his campaigns. But it is important to understand that his motivations, at least at the beginning, might have included genuine concern for his people alongside the personal ambition and malevolence that Demise's curse encouraged. The tragedy is that these legitimate concerns became twisted into something dark, used to justify actions that ultimately helped no one, least of all the Gerudo themselves. Because here is what happened after Ganondorf achieved his conquest in Ocarina of Time. After he betrayed the King of Hyrule's trust, after he used Link's opening of the Door of Time to access the Sacred Realm, after he claimed the Triforce of Power and transformed Hyrule into a nightmare realm, what happened to the Gerudo? They were left in the desert. The fortress remains, the Gerudo still live in their harsh homeland, and nothing fundamental about their circumstances has changed. Ganondorf's conquest brought them no closer to Hyrule's green fields. His power brought them no relief from the desert's cruelty. If anything, his actions poisoned relationships further, ensuring that even had he successfully secured permanent rule over Hyrule, the Gerudo would likely have been met with hatred and suspicion by its other peoples. This is perhaps the saddest aspect of Ganondorf's story, that his stated concern for his people, if it was ever truly present beyond his own rationalizations, became completely subsumed by his hunger for personal power. Demise's curse did its work perfectly, taking a leader who might have genuinely wanted to help his people and transforming him into a tyrant who used that desire as justification for cruelty, while ultimately serving only his own ambitions. Yet even in his worst moments, even as the Demon King ruling over a corrupted Hyrule, certain details suggest Ganondorf retained some connection to his Gerudo identity. The Gerudo themselves, despite his terrible actions, still refer to him as their king. Kome and Kotake remain loyal, watching over the Spirit Temple, the sacred site that was once central to Gerudo culture. And notably, during his 7-year reign of terror, while every other region of Hyrule suffered tremendously, the Gerudo Valley remained relatively untouched. The Gerudo continued their lives much as before. Does this suggest some lingering care for his people, or merely that the curse didn't require their suffering as part of its design? We cannot know for certain. But it adds complexity to the picture of Ganondorf as pure evil, suggesting instead a man who might have had genuine attachments even as darkness consumed him. The weight of kingship, combined with the harsh realities of desert life, combined with the insidious pull of Demise's curse, all of these factors shaped the young Ganondorf into the man who would eventually betray Hyrule's trust and plunge the kingdom into 7 years of darkness. But the formation of that man, the slow transformation from child to villain, was not a simple or straightforward process. It involved legitimate grievances, twisted into justifications for evil acts. It involved genuine desire for his people's welfare, corrupted into naked ambition. It involved the normal human capacity for anger and resentment, magnified by supernatural forces into something monstrous. And through it all, Ganondorf was still fundamentally trapped. Trapped by his role as king, bestowed before he could reject it. Trapped by his people's needs and expectations, which he could see but could never quite fulfill. Trapped by Demise's curse, which ensured that every path he walked would eventually lead to the same destination. Conflict with the hero and the princess, the pursuit of ultimate power, and defeat followed by seal or death or banishment, only to return and repeat the cycle once more. Born into the harshest land in Hyrule, crowned as king before he understood what that meant, carrying the expectations of his people and the curse of an ancient demon, Ganondorf's beginnings contained the seeds of everything that would follow. And as we will see, when he finally made his move against Hyrule, when he put into motion the plans that would lead to his first conquest and first defeat, he was not acting entirely from his own will. He was fulfilling a destiny written thousands of years before he was born, playing a role that had been waiting for him since Demise spoke those final words in a realm beyond time. The first reach for power, Ocarina of Time. The kingdom of Hyrule slumbered in prosperous peace, unaware of the storm gathering on its borders. In the aftermath of a civil war that had torn the land apart, King of Hyrule sought to rebuild, to establish stability through diplomacy and alliances. When Ganondorf, king of the Gerudo, arrived at the castle gates requesting an audience, pledging loyalty and friendship, it must have seemed like the answer to prayers, the chance to bring even the distant desert peoples into Hyrule's embrace. Only one person saw through the facade. Young Princess Zelda, blessed with prophetic dreams and the blood of the goddess flowing through her veins, watched through her window as Ganondorf spoke honeyed words to her father. She saw past the performance to the darkness beneath, the ambition and malice that lurked behind his eyes. She tried to warn her father, but who would believe a child's intuition over the words of a king? And so Ganondorf was welcomed into the royal court, given access to the castle, allowed to study and learn and plan, while everyone smiled and spoke of the new era of peace. It was a masterful performance. Ganondorf understood that he could not simply assault Hyrule with military force. The Gerudo were fearsome warriors, yes, but not numerous enough to conquer an entire kingdom through open warfare. Instead, he would use patience, cunning, and manipulation. He would feign loyalty while learning Hyrule's secrets, particularly the secret of the Sacred Realm and the Triforce hidden within. The Triforce, 3 golden triangles representing power, wisdom, and courage, left behind by the golden goddesses after they shaped the world. Whoever touched the complete Triforce with a balanced heart would be granted any wish they desired, but touch it with an unbalanced heart, and the Triforce would split into 3 pieces, with only one remaining in the possession of the one who touched it, while the other 2 pieces would fly to those chosen by destiny to embody the remaining virtues. Ganondorf knew of the Triforce, knew of its power, and understood that it represented ultimate freedom. With the Triforce, he could wish for anything: power enough to conquer any foe, resources to transform the Gerudo Desert into paradise, the ability to rewrite reality itself according to his desires. It was the ultimate prize, and he was willing to do anything to claim it. But the Sacred Realm was sealed, protected by the Door of Time within the Temple of Time, and that door could only be opened by gathering 3 spiritual stones and playing a sacred song on the Ocarina of Time. Ganondorf lacked the means to gather these stones himself. They were held by the Kokiri, the Gorons, and the Zoras, and none of them would willingly give their treasures to him. So he waited, and he plotted. And when a young boy from the forest named Link began his quest to gather the spiritual stones, Ganondorf saw his opportunity. He would let the boy do the work of opening the door, and then Ganondorf would simply walk through it. The tragedy is that this plan required collateral damage. The great Deku tree, ancient guardian of the forest, died because Ganondorf cursed him in an attempt to obtain the Kokiri's emerald. Darunia's people, the Gorons, were plagued with monsters in Dodongo's cavern, and many would have died if Link hadn't intervened. Lord Jabu Jabu of the Zoras was infected with a parasite, placing the entire aquatic people at risk. All of this suffering, all of this death and danger served only to force the holders of the spiritual stones to give them up, clearing Ganondorf's path to the sacred realm. Was this the curse at work, guiding Ganondorf's hand toward cruelty? Or were these simply the calculated moves of someone who had decided that his goal justified any means? Perhaps it doesn't matter. Perhaps by this point, Ganondorf and the curse had become so intertwined that separating them was impossible. What we can say is that the Ganondorf who engineered these atrocities was far from the Child King who might once have genuinely cared for his people. The desert had hardened him, and Demise's curse had twisted him. When Link finally opened the door of time and reached for the Master Sword, the blade of evil's bane resting in its pedestal in the Temple of Time, Ganondorf's plan came to fruition. The boy was too young to be the true hero of time. When he grasped the sword, it sealed him in the sacred realm for 7 years, giving his body time to grow strong enough to fulfill his destiny. And in that moment, when the door stood open and the path to the sacred realm lay clear, Ganondorf walked through. What transpired in the sacred realm is shrouded in mystery. We know Ganondorf reached the Triforce, we know he touched it, and we know what happened next. The Triforce, sensing the imbalance in his heart, the overwhelming desire for power that eclipsed wisdom and courage, split into 3 pieces. The Triforce of Power, golden and blazing with divine energy, remained with Ganondorf. The Triforce of Wisdom fled to Princess Zelda, and the Triforce of Courage went to the sleeping Link. Even with only one piece of the Triforce, Ganondorf became something beyond mortal. The Triforce of Power, embodying the essence of the goddess Din, granted him strength beyond measure, magical abilities that dwarfed what even the greatest sorcerers could achieve, and something approaching immortality. His physical capabilities were enhanced to godlike levels. His dark magic, already formidable through his studies with the Twin Witches, became devastating. And most importantly, he became extraordinarily difficult to kill. With this power, Ganondorf laid waste to Hyrule's royal family. Castletown was razed, its marketplace destroyed, its citizens transformed into shambling re-deads or forced to flee to Kakariko village. Ganondorf built his fortress, a dark tower that cast its shadow over the ruins of Hyrule Castle. For 7 years, he ruled over a kingdom transformed into nightmare. And what did this conquest achieve? The Kokiri forest was infested with monsters. The Gorons were nearly fed to a dragon. The Zoras watched as their domain froze solid, with their princess trapped in ice. Death Mountain rumbled with angry flame. The sky itself darkened with perpetual storm clouds. This was not the bringing of Hyrule's prosperity to the Gerudo. It was the dragging of all peoples down into shared misery. And the Gerudo. They remained in their desert fortress, seemingly unchanged, still following their king despite what he had become. Nabooru, their second in command, resisted, refusing to follow Ganondorf into darkness. For this, she was brainwashed by the Twin Witches, transformed against her will into the Sage of Spirit, forced to serve the very cause she had opposed until Link freed her. When Link finally awoke 7 years later, grown into the body of a young man, he found a world that had suffered terribly in his absence. His journey to awaken the 7 sages and confront Ganondorf was not just about defeating a villain, it was about freeing an entire kingdom from 7 years of torment. The final battle atop Ganondorf's tower is legendary among Zelda fans. Ganondorf, floating above his organ, hurling blasts of dark energy, toying with the hero even as Link deflected the attacks back at him. The Gerudo King fought with confidence bordering on arrogance, utterly certain of his victory. Even when Link began to gain the upper hand, even when the hero's sword struck home again and again, Ganondorf seemed almost amused. Until he didn't. When Link finally struck the blow that brought Ganondorf to his knees, something changed in the Demon King's expression. The confidence cracked, the amusement died, and what replaced it was fury, rage so intense that it transformed him. Using the Triforce of Power, Ganondorf abandoned his human form and became Ganon, a massive beast with the appearance of a boar, wielding twin greatswords, radiating power and malevolence. This transformation is significant. Ganondorf, the man, could be cunning, calculating, patient. Ganon the Beast is rage incarnate, power without refinement, destruction for its own sake. It's as if, in defeat, Ganondorf shed what remained of his humanity and became fully what Demise's curse intended, a manifestation of pure hatred and darkness. Yet even in this form, he fell to Link's blade. Even with the Triforce of Power, even as a demon of apocalyptic strength, he could not overcome the Master Sword wielded by the Hero of Time. And as Ganon collapsed, as the castle crumbled around them, Princess Zelda and the 7 sages worked together to seal him away in the sacred realm, transforming it from a place of divine power into a prison for the Demon King. Ganondorf's final words before the seal took hold were a curse, a promise that one day, when the seal was broken, he would return to hunt down Link and Zelda's descendants. It's an echo of Demise's own curse, a continuation of the cycle. Even in defeat, even sealed away, Ganondorf understood that this was not the end, that the cycle would continue. But then something unexpected happened. Princess Zelda, in an act of mercy that would have profound consequences, sent Link back in time. She returned him to his childhood, allowing him to reclaim the years of growth that had been stolen from him when he pulled the Master Sword from its pedestal. Link returned to the moment before he opened the door of time, before Ganondorf's conquest began, with all his memories of the future intact and the Triforce of Courage still marked on his hand. This act split the timeline into 2 branches, or technically 3, though the third branch where Link fails is rarely discussed in the games themselves. In the adult timeline, where Link was removed from existence by being sent back in time, Ganondorf's seal eventually weakened. Without the Hero of Time to oppose him, the people of Hyrule had no choice but to pray to the gods for salvation. The gods responded by flooding the entire kingdom, transforming Hyrule into a legend buried beneath the waves. But in the child timeline, the one Link returned to, something very different occurred. Armed with knowledge of the future and marked with the Triforce of Courage, Link went to Princess Zelda and told her everything. He warned the royal family of Ganondorf's treachery, of the betrayal that would come if they continued to trust the Gerudo King. And this time, they believed him. Ganondorf was arrested. His plans were exposed before they could come to fruition. He never touched the Triforce, never entered the sacred realm, never had the chance to conquer Hyrule. His carefully laid plans, years in the making, were undone by a child from the forest who knew the future because he had already lived it. And so, in this timeline, Ganondorf was sentenced to execution. The irony is bitter and profound. In the adult timeline, Ganondorf conquered Hyrule and ruled for 7 years before being sealed away. In the child timeline, he was stopped before he could do any real damage, a clear victory for the forces of good. But as we will see, preventing Ganondorf's conquest did not prevent the curse from manifesting. It merely changed how it would unfold, postponing the conflict rather than ending it. Ganondorf's first major appearance in the series established patterns that would echo through every subsequent incarnation. The manipulation, using others to achieve his goals. The patient planning, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The ultimate failure, despite overwhelming power, because he underestimated the hero and princess, or because he could not overcome the Master Sword's light. And most importantly, the inability to truly die, the certainty that even in defeat, the cycle would continue. Looking back at Ocarina of Time's Ganondorf, we see someone who is simultaneously calculating and driven by deep-seated resentment. His complaint about the desert, while not explicitly stated in this game, underlies everything he does. He looks at Hyrule's prosperity and feels the injustice of his people's suffering. He reaches for power not just for its own sake, but as a means of escaping the limitations that birth and circumstance have placed upon him. But in reaching for that power, in choosing conquest over cooperation, in deciding that his goals justified any means, Ganondorf became exactly what Demise's curse required him to be. He transformed from a king with potentially legitimate grievances into a demon that had to be sealed away for the safety of all. The tragedy is not that he was born evil, but that a combination of circumstances, choices, and supernatural influence shaped him into evil, and that once he had gone far enough down that path, there was no visible way back. Chains across timelines, the paradox of power. When Princess Zelda sent Link back in time, she could not have foreseen all the consequences of her merciful act. She wanted to give the hero of time back his stolen childhood, to allow him to live as a boy again, rather than a young man who had lost 7 years sealed in the sacred realm. It was an act of kindness, but like so many acts in the Zelda series, it carried profound and unforeseen ramifications. Time travel is a paradox by its very nature. When Link returned to his childhood carrying the Triforce of Courage and memories of a future that had now been prevented, he created a situation that should have been impossible. In the timeline he came from, Ganondorf had entered the sacred realm and touched the Triforce, causing it to split. But now Link had returned to a point before Ganondorf had done any such thing, before the Triforce had split, yet the mark of the Triforce of Courage remained on Link's hand. This created what fans and theorists have called a glitch in reality itself. The Triforce behaved as if it had already split, even though in this timeline it had not yet done so. Link possessed the Triforce of Courage despite Ganondorf never having touched the complete Triforce to cause it to split. The implications of this paradox would prove crucial to understanding what happened to Ganondorf in the child timeline. When Link warned Princess Zelda about Ganondorf's true nature, when the royal family moved to arrest the Gerudo King before he could enact his plans, they thought they were preventing a catastrophe. And in immediate terms, they were successful. Ganondorf never conquered Hyrule, never transformed it into a nightmare realm, never caused 7 years of suffering. This timeline was spared all of that. But Ganondorf could not simply be imprisoned forever. The crimes he was guilty of in this timeline were primarily ones of intention. He had schemed to betray the king, had planned to steal the Triforce, had shown himself to be untrustworthy. But the actual atrocities, the murder and destruction that had marked his rule in the adult timeline, had not occurred here. Eventually, the decision was made to execute him. The execution was to take place at the Arbiter's grounds, a prison built in the Gerudo Desert specifically to hold the worst criminals. The 6 sages who served Hyrule's royal family prepared for the ceremony. Ganondorf was brought to the mirror chamber atop the prison, chained to a stone platform, rendered helpless before divine judgment. One of the sages, the Sage of Water, drew a massive blade, the sword of the 6 sages, forged specifically to execute this task. The blade was raised, prayers were spoken, and then the sage plunged the sword directly into Ganondorf's chest. It should have been over. The blade of light should have ended the threat of the Demon King before he ever became the Demon King. But something impossible happened. As the sword pierced his chest, as death should have claimed him, the mark of the Triforce of Power blazed into existence on Ganondorf's hand. Divine energy flooded his body, not from his own actions, but seemingly from nowhere, from nothing, from the paradox that Link's time travel had created. The sages, witnessing this, could only describe it as a divine prank, as if the gods themselves were playing a cruel joke. The Triforce of Power granted Ganondorf near invulnerability. The sword of the 6 sages, despite being plunged into his chest, despite being a weapon of divine light specifically designed to kill him, could not complete its task. Ganondorf did not die. Instead, he broke free from his chains, and in an act of terrible vengeance, killed the Sage of Water, claiming the very sword that was meant to end him. The remaining sages, panicking, realized they could not destroy him, so they did the only thing they could. They used the Mirror of Twilight to banish Ganondorf to the Twilight Realm, a dimension parallel to Hyrule where the Twili people dwelt in exile. The Gerudo King, the Triforce of Power burning on his hand, the sword of the 6 sages still jutting from his chest, vanished into shadow. This moment is crucial to understanding Ganondorf's existence and his relationship with the curse. In the adult timeline, Ganondorf obtained the Triforce of Power by entering the Sacred Realm and touching the complete Triforce. In the child timeline, he never did that. He was arrested and sentenced to execution before he had the chance. Yet the Triforce of Power came to him anyway, appearing on his hand at the exact moment he needed it to survive. This suggests something profound about the nature of Demise's curse and Ganondorf's role within it. The curse does not merely influence Ganondorf's actions or push him toward evil. It ensures that certain events occur regardless of the specific circumstances. Ganondorf was meant to have the Triforce of Power. He was meant to be an immortal threat. He was meant to survive and continue the cycle. When the normal path to obtaining that power was closed off, reality itself seemed to bend to ensure he received it anyway. The term divine prank is both darkly humorous and deeply unsettling. It suggests that the gods, or fate, or the curse itself, have a sense of irony. The sages tried to prevent Ganondorf from ever becoming the Demon King by executing him before he could commit his worst crimes. But in trying to prevent his rise, they ensured it happened anyway, perhaps in an even more inexplicable and troubling way. For Ganondorf, this moment must have been a revelation. He had been caught, his plans exposed, brought to the point of execution. By all rights, his story should have ended there. But the Triforce of Power appeared, unsummoned and unexpected, and granted him the strength to survive. Did he understand in that moment that he was bound to something larger than himself? Did he realize that no matter what happened, no matter how thoroughly his enemies tried to stop him, the cycle would continue? The Twilight Realm into which he was banished was meant to be a prison, a place from which no one could return. But Ganondorf, resourceful and patient as always, found a way to turn even this exile to his advantage. He discovered Zant, one of the Twili, who harbored resentment at being passed over for the throne of his people. Ganondorf offered Zant power, a fraction of his own divine strength, enough to transform the bitter Twili into something approaching a god in his own realm. In exchange, Zant would help Ganondorf return to Hyrule. He would invade the Kingdom of Light, cover it in twilight, and prepare the way for Ganondorf's vengeance against those who had tried to execute him. Years passed. Generations passed. The Link who had warned Zelda grew old and died, becoming the hero's shade, a restless spirit bound to teach his sword techniques to his distant descendant. Princess Zelda was succeeded by other Zeldas, the bloodline continuing, each generation carrying a fraction of the goddess Hylia's power. And Ganondorf waited in the Twilight Realm, the sword of the six sages still in his chest, the wound glowing with unnatural light, a constant reminder of the execution that had failed. When Zant finally made his move, when the twilight spread across Hyrule and the land fell into shadow, Ganondorf's return seemed inevitable. But a new Link arose, a young man from Orden Village, marked by the spirit of the hero, destined to oppose the Demon King just as his predecessor had done. With the help of Midna, the true princess of the Twilight Realm, this new Link fought through the shadow, restored light to Hyrule's provinces, and eventually confronted both Zant and his master. The final confrontation with Ganondorf in Twilight Princess is markedly different from Ocarina of Time. The Demon King is older, more reflective, and perhaps more tired. He possesses Zelda briefly, forcing Link to fight the princess herself. Then he transforms into his beast form, Ganon, for another battle. And finally, in the rain-soaked fields of Hyrule, mounted on a black steed, Ganondorf faces Link in a horseback duel before dismounting for a final sword fight. Throughout these battles, Ganondorf seems almost weary. His earlier arrogance is muted. When Link finally drives the Master Sword into the glowing wound in his chest, the same spot where the sword of the six sages had pierced him during the failed execution, Ganondorf does not rage or transform again. He simply stands there, the Master Sword jutting from his body, and watches as the Triforce of Power fades from his hand. His final words are telling. "Do not think this ends here," he says. "The history of light and shadow will be written in blood." It's not a promise of his personal return, but an acknowledgement of the cycle itself. He knows that even as he dies, even as the Triforce of Power abandons him at last, the curse continues. There will be another incarnation, another conflict, another battle between hero and demon. And then, strangely, he sees a vision of Zant's neck snapping, the Twilight who had helped him return to Hyrule, taking one final act of vengeance from beyond death by killing Ganondorf himself. The Demon King's eyes gloss over. He remains standing, the Master Sword holding him upright, dying on his feet like a warrior, but dying nonetheless. The paradox of Ganondorf in Twilight Princess is that he succeeded and failed simultaneously. He returned from banishment. He wielded the Triforce of Power. He fought the hero and princess, fulfilling his role in the eternal cycle. But he achieved nothing permanent. Hyrule was saved. The twilight was lifted. His pawns, Zant and the Shadow Beasts, were destroyed. And in the end, the Master Sword claimed him as it always had, as it always would. What makes the Twilight Princess incarnation particularly tragic is how clearly Ganondorf seems to recognize the futility of it all. In Ocarina of Time, he had been confident, arrogant, certain of his eventual triumph even in defeat. Here, centuries later, with the memory of execution and exile, with years spent in the Twilight Realm, he seems to understand that the cycle is unbreakable. He will oppose the hero and princess because that is what the curse demands. He will wield terrible power because that is his role. And he will lose because that too is part of the pattern. The divine prank that granted him the Triforce of Power was not a gift, but another chain in his bondage. It saved his life, yes, but only so the cycle could continue. It granted him power, but only enough to be a proper threat, not enough to break free from his destiny. It ensured his survival, but only to guarantee his eventual defeat. This is perhaps the cruelest aspect of Demise's curse. It doesn't merely force Ganondorf to be evil or to fight hopeless battles. It gives him just enough success to make the struggle feel worthwhile, just enough power to make victory seem possible, just enough freedom to make him think he might escape, all while ensuring that the ultimate outcome is already written. He is powerful enough to be dangerous, but not powerful enough to win. He is immortal enough to survive defeat, but not immortal enough to avoid suffering. He is free enough to make choices, but not free enough to choose a different path. The Twilight Princess era ends with Ganondorf dead, the Master Sword having finally overcome the divine power that had kept him alive. But the cycle does not end. The curse does not lift. Somewhere, in some future age, in some new incarnation, the hatred will be reborn. The demon will rise again, and once more, a hero will be called to stop him. The Wind of Regret. A king reflects. Centuries after Twilight. Princess, in a timeline descended from Ocarina of Time's adult ending, something unprecedented occurred. The people of Hyrule found themselves facing a terrible threat. Ganondorf, or perhaps Ganon, had returned once more. The seal that had bound him in the sacred realm had weakened, and darkness emerged to threaten the kingdom yet again. But this time, there was no hero of time to stop him. Link had been sent back to his childhood by Princess Zelda, removed from the adult timeline entirely. The people prayed for the hero to return, searched for the boy in green, who would save them as he had done before, but he never came. How could he? He no longer existed in this timeline, and the soul of the hero had not yet been reborn. Faced with an unstoppable evil and no champion to fight it, the people of Hyrule could only turn to one last hope. They prayed to the goddesses themselves, and the goddesses answered, though not in the way anyone might have hoped. They flooded the entire kingdom. Water rose from the earth and poured from the heavens until all of Hyrule was submerged beneath the waves, sealed away in a timeless stasis beneath the ocean, with Ganondorf frozen along with it. The Wind Waker takes place hundreds of years after this great flood. Hyrule has become myth and legend, a story told to children about a kingdom that once existed before the world became endless ocean. Humanity survives on scattered islands, with the Gerudo people having evolved from the Zoras, with the Koroks having emerged from the Kokiri, with all of civilization reduced to small communities separated by vast expanses of water. And somewhere beneath these waves, sealed in the frozen ruins of Hyrule Castle, Ganondorf waited. Conscious or unconscious, dreaming or trapped in timeless suspension, the Demon King endured. The seal held for centuries, with only the Master Sword keeping his dark power contained. But seals weaken. Time erodes even the strongest magic. And eventually, inevitably, Ganondorf began to wake. The Ganondorf we meet in Wind Waker is different from any version we've encountered before. He is older, much older, having existed across countless centuries, even if most of that time was spent sealed away. He has had time, too much time, to think, to reflect, to look back at his actions and their consequences. The arrogance of youth has been tempered, though not eliminated, by the weight of ages. When Link of this era, a young boy from Outset Island, finally confronts Ganondorf in the Forsaken Fortress, the Demon King is almost conversational. He commends the boy's courage, even as he dismisses him as an annoyance. He speaks of destiny and fate with the tone of someone who has seen these patterns play out before. And when Link draws the Master Sword from its pedestal, inadvertently breaking the seal that had kept Ganondorf's magic contained, the Demon King thanks him for it. But it is later, in the final confrontation atop his tower, with the flooded Hyrule Castle visible below, that Ganondorf delivers a speech that has resonated with players for over 2 decades. After subduing Link and putting Zelda to sleep, after assembling the 3 pieces of the Triforce in his tower, Ganondorf pauses. He looks down at the sleeping princess, sees in her dreams the endless oceans that have replaced the kingdom he once tried to conquer, and begins to speak. "My country lay within a vast desert," he says, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. "When the sun rose into the sky, a burning wind punished my lands, searing the world. And when the moon climbed into the dark of night, a frigid gale pierced our homes. No matter when it came, the wind carried the same thing: death." It is a stark description, delivered without melodrama, simply stating the reality of the Gerudo Desert as he experienced it. The harsh sun that makes the air itself painful to breathe. The freezing nights that steal warmth and life. The wind, always the wind, bringing only suffering, regardless of whether it blew hot or cold. But the winds that blew across the green fields of Hyrule brought something other than suffering and ruin. I coveted that wind, I suppose. In these words lies perhaps the most human moment Ganondorf ever expresses in the entire series. Not a declaration of evil intent, not a boast of power, but a simple admission. He wanted what others had. He saw Hyrule's prosperity and desired it. He looked at the green fields and flowing water, at the life and abundance that seemed to come so easily to the Hylians, and felt the burning injustice of it all. I coveted that wind, I suppose. The phrasing is almost wistful, tinged with something that might be regret, or perhaps just acknowledgement. He admits his desire openly, without justification or excuse. He wanted the wind of Hyrule for himself, and everything that followed, all the conquest and cruelty, all the suffering he caused, stemmed from that desire. This speech has generated enormous debate among Zelda fans. Some see it as a redemptive moment, proof that Ganondorf was motivated by genuine concern for his people rather than pure malevolence. Others view it as manipulation, a villain trying to garner sympathy by reframing his acts of conquest as responses to legitimate grievances. Still others see it as both, a moment of genuine reflection that nonetheless doesn't excuse or erase the terrible things he has done. The truth, as is often the case, likely lies somewhere in the middle. Yes, Ganondorf probably did covet Hyrule's prosperity. Yes, the harsh conditions of the desert probably did motivate him, at least partly, to seek power and conquest. But we must also remember what happened after he achieved that conquest in Ocarina of Time. The Gerudo remained in the desert, gaining nothing from his rule except an absent king. The speech in Wind Waker might represent Ganondorf's original motivation, but it also reveals how thoroughly he lost sight of those motivations in his pursuit of power. Notice that Ganondorf speaks of coveting the wind, not of seeking it for his people. He says, "I coveted, not we desired, or my people needed." Even in this most humanizing speech, his focus remains ultimately on himself. The harsh conditions of the desert may have been real, his people's suffering may have been genuine, but his response was to seek personal power rather than solutions that might have actually helped them. Later in Wind Waker, we see just how hollow Ganondorf's stated motivations have become. When he finally assembles all 3 pieces of the Triforce, when he has the chance to make any wish he desires, he prepares to wish for the restoration of Hyrule, not to benefit his people, who are long extinct, but to rule over it himself. The prosperity he once envied, the wind he once coveted, these have become ends in themselves, divorced from any larger purpose. And that wish is denied. King Daphne's no Hansen. Hyrule, the last king of the drowned kingdom, reaches the Triforce first and wishes for Hyrule to be destroyed permanently, washed away so that neither Ganondorf nor anyone else can ever reclaim it. The old kingdom, with all its glory and all its flaws, must be allowed to fade so that new kingdoms can arise, free from the shadow of the past. Ganondorf's reaction to this is telling. He does not rage against the injustice of it. He does not howl in fury at being denied his wish. Instead, he laughs. A quiet, bitter laugh that speaks of resignation. And in his final battle with Link, after the boy has transformed into the hero of winds, Ganondorf fights with what almost seems like weariness. The duel at the top of the tower, with rain pouring down and waves crashing far below, has a melancholic quality. Ganondorf and Link fight with the Master Sword and the swords of the sages, light and dark clashing in the storm, while Zelda fires light arrows from behind. It is an echo of Ocarina of Time's final battle, the same conflict playing out once again across the centuries, the same roles being fulfilled. But when Link drives the Master Sword into Ganondorf's forehead in the final blow, something remarkable happens. The Demon King does not transform into a beast this time. He does not curse Link and Zelda or promise vengeance in some future life. Instead, he stands there with the blade lodged in his skull, slowly turning to stone, and speaks his final words. The wind, it is, blowing. These words have been analyzed and discussed endlessly. Some interpret them as Ganondorf finding peace at last, feeling the wind of Hyrule one final time as he dies. Others see it as ironic commentary. He coveted the wind, and now the wind accompanies his death. Still others view it as a reference to his earlier speech about the desert wind bringing death. Now, at last, that wind has found him. I would suggest that all these interpretations have merit, and that Ganondorf's final words encompass all of them. In his last moments, with the Master Sword ending his life, Ganondorf feels the wind blowing through the ruined tower atop the sunken Hyrule. It is the wind he coveted, the wind of the green fields, the wind that brought life instead of death. And in feeling it at last, at the very moment of his death, he finds a peace that has eluded him for his entire existence. The wind brings him contentment, finally, after centuries of struggle. The wind brings him release from the cycle of resurrection and defeat. The wind brings him rest. And yes, the wind brings his death, just as it brought death to his people in the desert, completing the circle of his existence. What makes Wind Waker's Ganondorf so compelling is this combination of reflection and futility. He has learned nothing and everything simultaneously. He understands that his quest for power has led nowhere, that his coveting of Hyrule's wind has brought him only centuries of conflict and ultimate defeat. Yet he cannot stop himself from following the same path, from assembling the Triforce, from opposing Link and Zelda, from playing his role in the eternal cycle one more time. The curse of Demise does not permit growth or change. It does not allow Ganondorf to learn from his defeats and choose a different path. The most it permits is this: moments of reflection, brief pauses when Ganondorf can see clearly the futility of his existence, before the cycle drags him forward once more. He can understand his prison, but not escape it. He can articulate his tragedy, but not transcend it. And so, Ganondorf turns to stone, the Master Sword lodged in his head, the wind blowing through the tower where he made his final stand. Below, the waves continue their endless motion, covering the ruins of the kingdom he tried to conquer. Above, Zelda and Link survive, the cycle continuing even as this particular incarnation of it ends. And in the moment between life and death, Ganondorf feels the wind that he coveted, brought to him at last by the hero who has defeated him, a final ironic gift from the curse that has defined his entire existence. The Wind Waker timeline is unique in the Zelda series because it is the only one where the cycle truly seems to end. With Hyrule destroyed, with the Old Kingdom washed away, with Link and Zelda sailing off to find new lands unconnected to the past, for the first time, the descendants of the hero and goddess are freed from the shadow of Demise's curse. They can build something new, something not predicated on eternal conflict. But Ganondorf does not get to share in that freedom. For him, the wind that finally brings peace is also the wind that brings death. He is not freed from the curse so much as he is finally, permanently ended by it. The stone statue of his body, frozen forever with the Master Sword protruding from it, serves as a memorial to the futility of his entire existence, reaching for freedom only at the moment when freedom and death become the same thing. The many deaths of a king, to be Ganondorf, is to die repeatedly, each death a temporary setback in an existence that stretches across millennia and timelines. In most stories, death is the ending. In Ganondorf's story, death is merely punctuation, a period that should end a sentence but somehow transforms into a comma, allowing the narrative to continue long past any reasonable conclusion. Let us catalog the many ways Ganondorf has died, been sealed, or been destroyed across the various games and timelines. Each death tells us something about the nature of his curse and the prison from which he cannot escape. In Ocarina of Time, Ganondorf technically dies twice. First, when Link defeats him in his humanoid form atop the collapsing tower, the Demon King seems to fall. But the Triforce of Power won't allow such a simple ending. He transforms into Ganon, the beast, and even this form eventually falls to the Master Sword. But Link doesn't kill him permanently. Instead, Zelda and the Seven Sages seal him in the Sacred Realm, trapping him in what was once a place of divine light, now transformed into a prison of shadow. Ganondorf is not dead, but suspended, frozen in time, aware or unaware we cannot say, waiting for the seal to weaken so the cycle can begin again. This becomes a pattern. Ganondorf is rarely killed outright. Instead, he is sealed, imprisoned, banished to other realms. Death would be a release. Sealing is continuation, existence without freedom, consciousness without ability to act. It is perhaps the cruelest fate imaginable, though whether Ganondorf remains aware during these imprisonments varies from account to account. In the original Legend of Zelda for the NES, we encounter Ganon in his beast form, seemingly resurrected or freed from some earlier defeat. Link must gather the pieces of the Triforce of Wisdom, storm Ganon's lair beneath Death Mountain, and fight the demon with silver arrows, weapons specifically designed to harm beings that are otherwise nearly invulnerable. When Link finally defeats Ganon with these arrows and the sword, the demon dissolves, first into a floating skull, and then into ash. But even this is not permanent. In Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link, we learn that although Ganon has been reduced to ashes, his followers seek to resurrect him. They need Link's blood to sprinkle on the ashes and restore their master to life. The infamous Game Over screen shows Ganon's silhouette laughing, suggesting that in timelines where Link fails, where his blood is spilled on those ashes, the resurrection succeeds. Even reduced to dust, even scattered and seemingly destroyed, Ganon waits for the opportunity to return. A Link to the Past presents us with Ganon trapped in the Dark World, the corrupted form of the Sacred Realm. He has been sealed there, but his influence still seeps into the Light World, corrupting it, transforming people into monsters, searching for a way to break free. When Link finally defeats him in this game, striking him down with the Master Sword, the hero claims all three pieces of the Triforce and uses them to wish for Ganon's evil to be undone. This should be the ultimate victory. Using the very object of Ganon's desire against him, using unlimited power to erase his malevolence from reality. Does it work? For a time, perhaps. But the curse endures beyond even the Triforces. Reality-altering power. New evils arise. The cycle continues. In Four Swords Adventures, we see a new incarnation of Ganondorf. Or perhaps a reincarnation, the terminology matters. This Ganondorf is described as having been born into the Gerudo tribe after the previous Demon King's defeat. He breaks the tribe's taboo by entering the pyramid where the Trident of Power lies, claiming it and transforming himself into Ganon. Once again, he must be sealed away, this time within the Four Sword itself, imprisoned within the very weapon used to defeat him. This is significant. It establishes that the curse doesn't always use the same Ganondorf. Sometimes, when the previous incarnation has been too thoroughly destroyed or sealed, a new one is born. A new male child among the Gerudo, bearing the same name, carrying the same destiny, playing out the same role. For the Gerudo tribe, this must be a particular cruelty. Every 100 years, the only boy born to them is destined to become a demon king that must be opposed and sealed away. Twilight Princess gives us the execution that failed, the death that became banishment, and then the final death that seemed, at last, permanent. Ganondorf stands on his feet as the life leaves his body, the Master Sword holding him upright even in death, the Triforce of Power fading from his hand as his eyes gloss over. It is a warrior's death, dignified in its way, and for once it seems truly final. No resurrection is hinted at. No return is promised. Just death at last. And yet, we know the cycle continues. Wind Waker takes place in a different timeline branch, yes, but it shows us that even when Ganondorf seems utterly defeated, even when he is turned to stone with the Master Sword lodged in his skull, the curse persists. Perhaps not through him specifically, but through the pattern he represents, the role he fulfills in the eternal conflict between light and shadow. In Breath of the Wild, we see what might be the logical endpoint of Ganondorf's many deaths and resurrections. After being killed and revived and sealed and released so many times across so many ages that even the historians of Hyrule have lost track, something fundamental changed. Ganondorf, in his constant resurrections, began to lose himself. The person, the king, the man who once coveted the wind of Hyrule, all of that faded away, leaving only the malice, only the hatred, only the curse itself. This is Calamity Ganon, no longer Ganondorf, no longer even truly Ganon, but something more primal and less sentient. A force of destruction that manifests every 10,000 years or so, attacking Hyrule with monster armies and corrupted technology, seeking to destroy rather than conquer, to end rather than rule. The calamity is what remains when even the Triforce of Power cannot fully reconstitute a being that has been destroyed and resurrected too many times. The tragedy here is profound. The curse of Demise demanded that his hatred be reborn in an endless cycle, but it apparently didn't account for the wear and tear that repeated death and resurrection would cause. Ganondorf, in being forced to fulfill his role again and again, gradually lost the very qualities that made him a person. His memories, his desires, his identity, all of it eroded away, leaving only the core function the curse required, being a threat to Hyrule, to Link, to Zelda. Calamity Ganon is described in Breath of the Wild as having given up on reincarnation and assumed his pure, enraged form. This is hatred without purpose, destruction without goal, power without will. It is what happens when Demise's curse is stripped down to its bare essentials, when the incarnation loses all of the incarnate and becomes only embodied malice. 100 years before Breath of the Wild's present day, Calamity Ganon attacked Hyrule once more. The kingdom had prepared, building divine beasts and guardian automatons using ancient Sheikah technology, confident they could finally defeat the Calamity once and for all. But Ganon corrupted the very weapons meant to destroy him, turned them against their creators, and devastated Hyrule so thoroughly that the kingdom never fully recovered. Link nearly died in that battle, saved only by being placed in the Shrine of Resurrection for a century. Zelda used her divine power to seal herself and Calamity Ganon together in Hyrule Castle, holding the malice at bay through sheer force of will for 100 years, waiting for the hero to recover and return. When Link finally confronts Calamity Ganon after awakening from his century-long slumber, what he faces is not a person, but a thing. A mass of malice and machinery, a being that has gone so far beyond humanity that communication is impossible. There is no speech, no negotiation, no moment of reflection. There is only battle, only the endless cycle playing out one more time, stripped of all context and meaning. And when Calamity Ganon is defeated, when it attempts one final transformation into Dark Beast Ganon, when Link fires the light arrows and Zelda seals the malice away one last time, it seems at last to be over. Zelda speaks of Ganon having given up on reincarnation, suggests that perhaps this time the cycle has truly ended. But can we believe this? How many times has Ganon seemed defeated for good, only to return? Then comes Tears of the Kingdom, and we discover that beneath Hyrule Castle, sealed in the depths, there lies a mummified corpse. Ganondorf, the actual man, imprisoned thousands of years ago by King Rauru of the Zonai, his body preserved in a state between life and death, his malice seeping up through the earth to manifest as the Calamity Ganon that Link has been fighting. This revelation reframes everything. Calamity. Ganon was not Ganondorf transformed beyond recognition. It was the malice and hatred leaking from his imprisoned body, taking form and attacking Hyrule, while the man himself remained sealed beneath the castle. The loss of self, the degradation into pure malice. This was not the result of too many resurrections, but the consequence of an imprisonment so long and so terrible that even Ganondorf's consciousness could not remain intact. Consider what this means. For thousands of years, potentially 10,000 years or more, Ganondorf has been trapped beneath Hyrule Castle, conscious or semi-conscious, unable to move or act, his body withered to a mummified husk, kept alive only by King Rauru's sealing magic. His hatred and malice are so strong that they seep from his body like radiation, coalescing into the calamities that periodically attack Hyrule. But the man himself, the person, has been trapped in this state for so long that when he finally awakens, his mind has been twisted into something barely recognizable. When Link and Zelda discover Ganondorf's mummified form in the depths beneath the castle, when the seal finally breaks and he awakens, the Demon King is both more and less than human. He possesses terrible power, granted by Sonia's secret stone, which he claimed through murder thousands of years ago. He transforms into the Demon King, then creates puppet Zeldas to sow chaos, then ultimately consumes his secret stone to become the Demon Dragon, a transformation so absolute that it erases his consciousness entirely and permanently, leaving only a creature of pure destruction. This final transformation in Tears of the Kingdom represents perhaps the ultimate expression of Ganondorf's tragedy. The secret stones, we learn, can grant immortality through draconification. Swallowing the stone transforms the user into a dragon, granting eternal life, but at the cost of losing one's sense of self forever. It is explicitly described as a forbidden act, something that should never be done under any circumstances. Zelda herself undergoes this transformation to preserve and restore the Master Sword, knowing she will lose herself but trusting that Link will find a way to save her. And miraculously, at the end, through the power of Rauru and Sonia working through Link, she is restored. But Ganondorf receives no such salvation. When he transforms into the demon dragon, when Link shatters the secret stone on the dragon's forehead, the transformation is revealed to be irreversible through destruction. The dragon dies, and with it, Ganondorf is finally, truly ended. Or is he? The cycle has seemed to end before. The curse has appeared broken previously. But Demise's words were clear. An incarnation of his hatred would follow the bloodline of the goddess and the spirit of the hero for all time. Can even the total destruction of Ganondorf's consciousness, can even the shattering of a secret stone and the death of the dragon he became, can even this be enough to end what was set in motion thousands of years before Ganondorf was ever born? Each death Ganondorf has experienced has been a failure of the curse to contain him and a failure of Ganondorf to escape it. He has been killed, sealed, imprisoned, banished, turned to stone, reduced to ashes, degraded into mindless malice, and finally destroyed so thoroughly that his very consciousness was annihilated. And yet, throughout all of this, the curse persists. New incarnations arise. The cycle continues. The pattern repeats. To die again and again without truly dying is its own form of torture. To be destroyed and resurrected, sealed and released, defeated and restored. This is not life, but a mockery of it. Ganondorf's many deaths do not grant him rest. They do not free him from his burden. They are merely intermissions in an endless performance, pauses in a play that can never reach its final curtain. And perhaps this is the ultimate cruelty of Demise's curse, that it denies Ganondorf even the release of permanent death. He cannot escape through victory because the curse ensures he will always be defeated. But neither can he escape through defeat because the curse ensures he will always return. He is trapped between these two states, achieving neither lasting triumph nor final rest, forever caught in the cycle of conflict that defines his existence. Imprisoned in time. Tears of the Kingdom. Deep beneath Hyrule Castle, in chambers carved from stone older than memory, in darkness absolute and perfect, a body waited. Not dead, not alive, but suspended in the terrible space between. A mummified corpse held in eternal stasis by the withered arm of King Rauru, the first ruler of Hyrule, the Zonai who had sacrificed everything to contain a threat too powerful to destroy. Thousands of years passed in that darkness. Kingdoms rose and fell on the surface above. Heroes were born, fulfilled their destinies, and passed into legend. Princesses named Zelda sealed away calamities, fought against the darkness, preserved what remained of their shattered kingdom. And through it all, Ganondorf remained in the depths, conscious or dreaming. We cannot say his malice seeping upward through the earth like poison through water, manifesting as the calamities that periodically devastated the land. Tears of the Kingdom presents us with perhaps the most ancient and most tragic version of Ganondorf we have ever encountered. To understand this incarnation, we must travel back in time, to an era when Hyrule was young, when the Zonai had just descended from the sky, when the kingdom was being founded by King Rauru and Queen Sonia. The Gerudo tribe existed in this ancient era, dwelling in the desert as they always had. And among them, as tradition dictated, a male was born, Ganondorf, who would become their king. But this Ganondorf was not content to remain in the desert. When Rauru sent Molduga in a stampede toward Hyrule Castle, testing the new kingdom's defenses, Ganondorf saw an opportunity. He came to Hyrule, knelt before Rauru, and swore allegiance to the Zonai king. It was a deception, of course. Ganondorf had already set his sights on the secret stones that Rauru and Sonia possessed, ancient artifacts created by the goddesses, left in the care of the Zonai, capable of amplifying their wielders' innate powers to godlike levels. With such a stone, Ganondorf knew he could achieve his ambitions. Without it, he was merely a powerful sorcerer. With it, he would become unstoppable. Princess Zelda, displaced in time from the distant future, arrived during this era and immediately recognized Ganondorf for what he was. She had fought his malice in her own time, had battled Calamity Ganon, and watched Link seal it away. And seeing the man himself in his human form filled her with dread. She warned Rauru, but the Zonai King, in his wisdom and mercy, and perhaps his arrogance, believed he could keep watch over Ganondorf, that by accepting his oath of allegiance, Rauru could control him. It was a fatal mistake. One night, Ganondorf created a puppet in Zelda's form and used it to lure Queen Sonia away from the safety of the castle. In a courtyard lit by moonlight, as Sonia extended her hand in greeting to what she thought was Zelda, Ganondorf emerged from the shadows and struck. He murdered the Queen of Hyrule, ripped the secret stone from her body, and absorbed its power. The transformation was immediate and terrible. The secret stone amplified Ganondorf's already considerable dark powers, but it did more than that. It transformed him fundamentally, making him into something beyond mortal. His title changed in that moment from King of the Gerudo to Demon King, and with his newfound power, he summoned an army of monsters, demons from the depths, creatures of malice and shadow that swept across Hyrule like a plague. This was the Imprisoning War, an ancient conflict that nearly destroyed Hyrule before the kingdom had barely begun. Rauru gathered the leaders of each of Hyrule's peoples, the Rito, the Goron, the Zora, and a Gerudo who opposed Ganondorf's path, and gave each of them a secret stone, awakening them as sages. Together with Zelda, who wielded Rauru's secret stone sent back through time, they fought against the Demon King. But even with the power of 6 sages, even with Rauru's light magic and Zelda's time powers, even with the combined might of all Hyrule's peoples united against him, Ganondorf could not be defeated. He was too powerful, the secret stone of darkness granting him abilities that exceeded anything the sages could bring to bear against him. The war was not going well. Hyrule stood on the brink of annihilation, so Rauru made the only choice left to him. He could not kill Ganondorf, but he could contain him. The Zonai King used all his power, all his light magic, channeled through his secret stone, to create a seal. He imprisoned Ganondorf deep beneath what would become Hyrule Castle, binding the Demon King in stasis, holding him suspended between life and death. The cost was everything. Rauru's body withered away in the act of maintaining the seal, degrading over thousands of years until only his right arm remained, glowing with the light magic that kept Ganondorf contained. The king essentially died to create the prison, existing afterward only as a spirit, watching over the seal, ensuring it held through the ages. And Ganondorf? Ganondorf remained there, in the depths, in the darkness, for 10,000 years or more. His body mummified, his consciousness trapped within his decaying form, his malice so strong that even the seal could not fully contain it. That malice seeped upward, taking form as the Calamity Ganons that would periodically attack Hyrule, manifestations of the Demon King's hatred given shape by his imprisoned fury. Try to comprehend what this means. For 10,000 years, longer than all of recorded human history in our world, Ganondorf existed in a state of conscious imprisonment. He could not move. He could not act. He could not die. He could only be, trapped in his withered body, held in place by light magic that burned constantly against his darkness, aware perhaps of the passage of time, or perhaps lost in some dream state between consciousness and oblivion. What do 10,000 years of imprisonment do to a mind, even a mind as powerful as Ganondorf's? What does it mean to be aware for that long without stimulus, without change, without hope of escape? Time, we are told, is the worst torture. Give a person forever, and they will eventually go mad from the sheer endless expanse of existence. But Ganondorf had no choice. The curse would not let him die. The seal would not let him act. He could only endure. The creation of Hyrule Castle directly above his prison was deliberate. The castle functioned as part of the seal itself, channeling Rauru's light magic, helping to contain Ganondorf's malice. Every stone in its foundation, every chamber in its depths, every tower reaching toward the sky, all of it served the purpose of keeping the Demon King imprisoned. Hyrule Castle was not just the seat of power for the kingdom's rulers. It was the largest prison ever constructed, holding within its depths the greatest threat their world had ever known. For thousands of years, the seal held perfectly. Ganondorf remained trapped, and the people of Hyrule lived their lives in relative peace, though stories of the ancient Demon King passed into legend, then myth, then were largely forgotten. But then, 100 years before the events of Breath of the Wild, disaster struck. Calamity Ganon emerged with unprecedented fury, corrupting the divine beasts and guardians that Hyrule had built to combat it. The kingdom was devastated. Hyrule Castle itself was severely damaged in the conflict, and when the castle was damaged, when its stones cracked and its foundations weakened, the seal that had held Ganondorf for so long began to fail. This is why the Calamity was so powerful in that era, not just because it was Ganondorf's malice made manifest, but because the seal containing him had weakened. More of his power could leak through. More of his consciousness could reach into the world above. The damage to Hyrule Castle translated directly to damage to the prison, and Ganondorf, still trapped beneath the ruins, began to wake. When Link and Zelda descend into the depths at the beginning of Tears of the Kingdom, they find the source of the gloom that has been spreading through Hyrule's underground. They find ancient ruins, carved passages, and at the center of it all, they find him, Ganondorf's mummified body, held in place by Rauru's withered arm, the seal still intact but failing, gloom seeping from the corpse in waves of malevolent energy. The moment is stunning in its stark horror. This is not the powerful Demon King of previous games, not the arrogant warrior or the reflective older man. This is a corpse, a husk, preserved beyond all natural span of life, kept in that state by magic that has outlasted the civilization that created it. His skin is gray and withered, stretched tight over ancient bones. His eyes are closed or perhaps gone. His hair, once red with the signature color of Demise's curse, hangs lank and faded. And the gloom, the malice, the pure hatred that defines his curse, all of it pours from his body like blood from a wound. Zelda reaches for the teardrop-shaped jewel that has fallen from Rauru's arm, a secret stone, though she doesn't know it yet. And the moment she touches it, the moment her power activates the artifact, Ganondorf's eyes snap open. The seal breaks. Rauru's arm falls away, turning to dust after holding its vigil for 10,000 years. Ganondorf rises from his ancient throne of stone, and the upheaval begins. What follows is almost anticlimactic compared to the horror of his awakening. Ganondorf attacks with gloom, strikes the Master Sword, and shatters it, wounds Link's arm so severely that it begins to decay. He mocks them, recognizing them somehow despite the ages that have passed, speaking Link and Zelda's names with familiar contempt. He causes Hyrule Castle to rise into the sky, sending Link and Zelda plummeting into the depths. And then, with the seal broken and his power returning, he begins to reclaim the surface world. But consider what this means from Ganondorf's perspective. He has been imprisoned for 10,000 years. He has existed in darkness and silence and stasis for longer than civilizations typically endure. And the moment he wakes, the moment the seal breaks, his first action is to attack Link and Zelda, to fulfill the role that Demise's curse demands of him, to play out the ancient conflict one more time. Does he even remember why he's fighting? Does he understand what he's become? Or has the curse so thoroughly subsumed his identity that he simply acts according to its dictates without thought or choice? The Ganondorf of Tears of the Kingdom speaks with confidence and performs acts of tactical brilliance, creating puppet Zeldas to sow confusion, waiting in the depths for Link to come to him rather than wasting energy on premature confrontation. But there's something missing from this incarnation, something that even the more villainous earlier versions possessed: genuine personality, individual motivation, a sense that he is a person making choices rather than a role being enacted. This Ganondorf has been reduced by his imprisonment. The curse has burned away everything extraneous, leaving only the core function: oppose the hero, threaten the princess, seek ultimate power, fulfill the role of the Demon King. He goes through the motions brilliantly, but they are motions, patterns, behaviors rather than freely chosen actions. And when Link finally confronts him in the depths, when the battle reaches its climax and Ganondorf faces defeat once again, he makes a final, desperate choice. He consumes his secret stone, undergoing draconification, transforming himself into the demon dragon. It is forbidden, Mineru had explained, because swallowing a secret stone grants eternal life at the cost of one's sense of self. It transforms the person into a dragon, yes, but that dragon loses all identity, all consciousness, all that made them who they were. For Zelda, this transformation was an act of love and sacrifice. She gave up herself to restore the Master Sword, to give Link the weapon he needed, trusting that somehow he would find a way to save her even from this seemingly irreversible fate. And indeed, through the power of Rauru and Sonia's spirits working through Link, she is restored at the end, returned to her human form with most of her memories intact. But Ganondorf receives no such grace. When he becomes the demon dragon, when he transforms into a creature of pure destructive rage, there is no plan for his restoration, no hope that he might return to himself. The transformation is an act of desperation, a last attempt to win through overwhelming power when skill and strategy have failed. And when Link shatters the secret stone on the dragon's forehead, the dragon dies, and with it, any possibility that Ganondorf might someday return. It is a final extinction, the complete annihilation of everything Ganondorf was or could have been. Not just his body, but his mind, his memories, his very self, all of it consumed by the dragon, all of it destroyed when the dragon fell. After 10,000 years of imprisonment, after countless incarnations across multiple timelines, after resurrection and defeat and seal and escape repeated again and again across ages beyond counting, this is how it ends. Not with a final word or a moment of recognition, but with the death of a mindless beast, a creature that once was Ganondorf, but has gone so far beyond any recognizable identity that calling it by his name almost seems inaccurate. The tragedy of Tears of the Kingdom's Ganondorf is the tragedy of the curse taken to its logical extreme. Imprisoned for so long that even his malice degraded into the Calamity Ganons. Sealed so thoroughly that even when he woke, something fundamental was missing. And finally, transformed so completely that the person ceased to exist entirely, leaving only the hatred, only the curse, only the endless cycle playing out one final time before being terminated not through victory, but through the obliteration of the vehicle through which it was manifesting. In the game's final moments, as the demon dragon falls, and Link and Zelda are reunited. As Rauru and Sonia's spirits appear to guide the healing of Zelda's dragon form, there is no mention of Ganondorf, no acknowledgement of what was lost, no reflection on the terrible fate of the Demon King. He simply ceases to exist, and the story continues without him. Perhaps this is the freedom he never found in life, the freedom of non-existence, of finally being released from the curse through complete destruction. Or perhaps it is the ultimate tragedy, that after existing for so long, after enduring so much, his ending is to simply stop, to be erased so thoroughly that even the person he once was cannot be recovered. Tears of the Kingdom gives us the full scope of Ganondorf's existence from the perspective of deep time. 10,000 years of imprisonment, countless ages of the cycle repeating, and a final transformation that erases everything, leaving not even memory, only absence. It is perhaps the darkest exploration of Ganondorf's curse that the series has offered. The suggestion that there is no escape, no redemption, no possibility of anything except continuation until eventual annihilation. The Prisoner of Destiny. At the heart of Ganondorf's story lies a philosophical question that has troubled humanity for as long as we have been capable of abstract thought. Are we the authors of our own fate, or do we merely play out roles that have been written for us? In Ganondorf's case, this question takes on terrifying immediacy, because we know with absolute certainty that his path was laid out before he was born, that his role was defined by a curse thousands of years older than he is. But knowing that doesn't answer the question. It only makes it more urgent. Consider the facts as we know them. Demise's curse ensures that an incarnation of his hatred will continually be reborn to threaten those with the blood of the goddess and the spirit of the hero. Ganondorf is that incarnation, shaped by forces beyond his control to fulfill a dark purpose. But the curse speaks of an incarnation, not a puppet. It promises that the hatred will manifest, not that the manifestation will be mindless or choiceless. So where, exactly, does Ganondorf's agency begin and the curse's influence end? At what point does guided become forced? When does influence become control? We see throughout the series that Ganondorf makes decisions. He chooses to feign loyalty to the King of Hyrule in Ocarina of Time rather than launching an immediate attack. He chooses his targets, the Great Deku Tree, the Gorons, the Zoras, and the methods he uses against them. He chooses, in Wind Waker, to speak of his past and his motivations rather than remaining silent. He chooses, in Tears of the Kingdom, to murder Queen Sonia to obtain her secret stone, rather than pursuing some other path to power. These are choices, real decisions that require thought, planning, and the weighing of options. They are not automatic. They are not reflexive. Ganondorf demonstrates, again and again, the capacity for strategic thinking, for adapting to circumstances, for learning from past encounters. All of this suggests a mind at work, a person making choices, not a programmed entity following predetermined scripts. And yet, all these choices flow in one direction. Every decision Ganondorf makes, no matter how free it might appear in the moment, ultimately serves the curse. He never chooses peace. He never chooses cooperation. He never chooses to use his considerable power for anything other than conquest and domination. The curse doesn't need to control his every action if it can ensure that the sum total of his actions always leads to the same outcome. This is the insidious nature of Ganondorf's prison. He has the illusion of freedom, the ability to choose tactics, to select methods, to decide on approaches. But the strategic direction is set. The ultimate goal is predetermined, and the final outcome is already written. He can choose how to play his role, but he cannot choose whether to play it at all. Consider a thought experiment. What if, at any point in his existence, Ganondorf had chosen differently? What if, when he first arrived at Hyrule Castle, he had genuinely sworn loyalty to the king and kept that oath? What if, when he obtained the Triforce of Power, he had used it to transform the Gerudo Desert into paradise rather than conquering Hyrule? What if, in any of his incarnations, he had sought alliance instead of domination? The games never show us these possibilities because they cannot happen within the framework of the curse. Or can they? Would the curse allow such a choice? Or would it intervene somehow, pushing Ganondorf back onto the path of darkness through circumstance or influence or simple overwhelming compulsion? We have hints that the curse's influence is not absolute. In Wind Waker, Ganondorf's moment of reflection suggests he is capable of seeing his choices and their consequences with something approaching regret. In Twilight Princess, his acknowledgement of the eternal cycle suggests awareness of his role within it. These moments of consciousness about his own situation imply a level of understanding that transcends simple programming. And there are moments, brief, fleeting, but present, when Ganondorf seems to reach for something beyond what the curse demands of him. The speech in Wind Waker about coveting the wind is one such moment. Even if his pursuit of power ultimately served only himself, the fact that he can articulate a broader motivation, can speak of his people's suffering and his desire for something better, suggests that the curse has not completely erased his capacity for genuine human feeling. But perhaps these moments are themselves part of the curse's design, perhaps allowing Ganondorf enough consciousness to understand his situation, enough self-awareness to recognize his prison, serves to make that prison more effective. A mindless force of destruction might be easier to dismiss, easier to fight without hesitation. But a being who seems to have motivations, who speaks of legitimate grievances, who demonstrates moments of humanity, such a being complicates the response, creates moral ambiguity, and perhaps makes the eternal conflict more painful for all involved. The question of whether Ganondorf could have ever been redeemed is central to understanding his tragedy. If we believe that he had genuine free will, that he chose his path despite having the option to choose differently, then his fate is deserved, the natural consequence of his own evil decisions. But if we believe the curse left him no real choice, that he was doomed from birth to fulfill a dark role, then his fate becomes tragic, the punishment of an innocent for crimes he was forced to commit. The truth, I suspect, lies in the uncomfortable middle ground where most moral questions reside. Ganondorf likely had some degree of free will, some capacity for choice within the constraints that bound him. But those constraints were so powerful, so pervasive, that true freedom, the ability to choose a fundamentally different path, may have been beyond his reach. Consider what it would have taken for Ganondorf to escape his curse. He would need to recognize that he was cursed, understand the nature of that curse, and then deliberately act against its influence, despite that influence being literally woven into his existence. He would need to resist not just external pressure, but internal inclination, because the curse doesn't just create obstacles. It shapes desires, influences motivations, makes certain paths feel natural and others feel impossible. And even if he somehow managed all of that, even if through extraordinary willpower and self-awareness he chose peace over conflict, cooperation over conquest, would the curse allow such a choice to stand? Or would circumstances conspire to bring him back to the ordained path? Would people's expectations and fears create situations where conflict became inevitable? Would other agents of darkness arise to fill the role he abandoned? These are questions the games never explicitly answer, because they never show us a Ganondorf who seriously attempts to break free from his curse. Every incarnation we see follows the pattern, plays the role, fulfills the prophecy. We never get to see what would happen if one of them refused. But the absence of that refusal is itself telling. Across multiple incarnations, across different timelines, across thousands of years, Ganondorf never chooses a different path. Either the curse is so powerful that choice is impossible, or some fundamental aspect of Ganondorf's nature, something core to who he is across all incarnations, aligns with what the curse demands of him. Perhaps both are true. Perhaps the curse selected Ganondorf, or beings like him, precisely because their nature would make them suitable vessels for its purpose. The harsh conditions of the desert, the isolation of the Gerudo, the burden of kingship thrust upon a child. These circumstances create the kind of resentment and ambition that the curse needs. Demise's hatred might naturally find purchase in a heart already bitter with perceived injustice. If so, then the tragedy deepens. Ganondorf's circumstances made him vulnerable to the curse, and the curse exploited that vulnerability, taking legitimate grievances and natural ambition and twisting them into something dark. He might have been someone who wanted to help his people and was corrupted into a demon who used his people as an excuse for personal conquest. The person he could have been was destroyed to create the villain the curse required. There is also the question of whether anyone ever extended to Ganondorf the kind of grace that might have made a different path possible. In every incarnation, people who recognize his dark nature either oppose him or try to control him. Zelda warns against him. Rauru tries to keep watch over him while accepting his oath. The sages attempt to execute him. No one, it seems, ever tries to redeem him, to reach out with genuine compassion and offer an alternative to the path he's on. Would such an attempt have worked? Could love or mercy or understanding have broken Demise's curse where force and seals could not? We cannot know, because the attempt is never made. And perhaps the curse ensures it isn't, shaping circumstances so that Ganondorf is always seen as irredeemable, always treated as an enemy, always given reasons to justify his resentment and his actions. The cycle, then, might be self-perpetuating not just through Ganondorf's choices, but through everyone's responses to him. He is expected to be evil, treated as a threat, opposed before he can fully manifest his worst intentions, and these expectations and treatments become, themselves, justifications for the darkness he embraces. The curse doesn't just trap Ganondorf, it traps everyone involved in the cycle, ensuring they all play their parts in maintaining it. And at the center of this philosophical labyrinth stands Ganondorf himself, a being who appears to make choices, but whose choices always lead to the same destination, who seems to possess free will, but whose will is exercised within such narrow constraints that its freedom becomes questionable, who is held accountable for his actions, even though those actions might be the inevitable result of forces beyond his control. He is both victim and villain, both cursed and culpable, both prisoner and warden of his own cell. Understanding him requires holding multiple contradictory truths simultaneously: that he is responsible for terrible evil, that he is trapped by circumstances not of his making, that he makes real choices, that those choices are not truly free, that he could have been different, that he could never have been anything other than what he became. This is the essential tragedy of Ganondorf's existence. Not that he is evil, but that he might have been forced into being evil. Not that he is powerful, but that his power serves only to make his prison more secure. Not that he dies repeatedly, but that he cannot die permanently, cannot find peace, cannot escape the cycle that defines and destroys him. And perhaps most tragic of all, that we can never be certain whether any of this matters, whether his inner experience includes genuine suffering or mere programmed responses, whether he deserves our pity or our condemnation, or some complex mixture of both. The curse that creates him also obscures him, making it impossible to see clearly where the person ends and the role begins. Freedom in endings. Throughout Ganondorf's long existence across timelines and incarnations, there have been few moments of genuine peace. His life, if we can call it that, has been defined by conflict, conquest, defeat, imprisonment, and resurrection in an endless cycle. But there have been moments, brief, fleeting, precious, when something like freedom touched him. And almost always, these moments came at the end, as death finally claimed him in one form or another. The most famous of these moments comes at the conclusion of the Wind Waker. After his final defeat, after Link drives the Master Sword into his forehead in what should be his death blow, Ganondorf does not rage or struggle. He stands there on top of his tower, the blade lodged in his skull, rain pouring down around him, and speaks his final words. The wind, it is, blowing. There is no hatred in these words, no curse or promise of return, no defiance or rage, just observation, simple and profound. The wind is blowing. The thing he coveted, the gentle wind of Hyrule that carried life instead of death, brushes across his face one final time as consciousness leaves him. And in that moment, perhaps for the first time in his entire existence, Ganondorf experiences something approaching peace. The wind brings him death, yes, but it also brings him rest. After centuries of struggle, after ages of playing out the same conflict over and over, after lifetimes of pursuing power and conquest and ultimate control, the wind brings him an ending. And there is something almost like gratitude in how he acknowledges it, this final irony, that the thing he desired most is granted to him at the exact moment when he can no longer use it, when it serves only to accompany his departure from existence. This moment has resonated with players precisely because it humanizes Ganondorf in ways that his earlier appearances did not. The arrogant villain of Ocarina of Time, the calculating schemer of various other appearances, these versions of Ganondorf seemed incapable of appreciating anything beyond power and conquest. But Wind Waker shows us a Ganondorf who has lived long enough to understand what he lost in his pursuit of power, who can appreciate beauty even as it marks his ending. It suggests that underneath the curse, underneath the Demon King and the incarnation of hatred, there might have been a person who could feel something other than ambition and resentment. The tragedy is that this person only emerges at the moment of final defeat, when it's far too late to matter, when the only freedom available is the freedom of death. Similar moments appear in other endings. In Twilight Princess, when Link drives the Master Sword into Ganondorf's chest wound and the Triforce of Power finally fades from his hand, the Demon King does not fall immediately. He remains standing, held upright by the blade, dying on his feet like a warrior. There is dignity in this death, a kind of nobility in refusing to fall even as life leaves him. And his final words, though they promise that the history of light and shadow will continue to be written in blood, carry less the tone of a threat and more the tone of a lament. He knows the cycle will continue. He knows that even his death is not an ending, but merely a pause. And there seems to be weariness in that knowledge, an exhaustion with the endless struggle that has defined his existence. These death scenes suggest that Ganondorf, when finally facing an end that seems permanent, experiences something like relief. The burden of being the Demon King, of serving as the incarnation of ancient hatred, of playing out the same conflict across lifetimes. Perhaps this burden is heavier than we imagine. Perhaps death, true death, represents not defeat, but liberation. In Breath of the Wild, after Link defeats Calamity Ganon and Dark Beast Ganon, Princess Zelda speaks of how Ganon has given up on reincarnation. The implication is that after so many cycles of death and resurrection, after being degraded from a person into mindless malice and then into a bestial force of destruction, even the curse itself was exhausted. The thing that was once Ganondorf had been destroyed and reconstituted so many times that nothing remained to resurrect, only the hatred itself, pure and primal, and ultimately defeated. There is something almost merciful about this ending. If Ganondorf truly has reached a point where even the curse cannot bring him back, where the cycle has finally exhausted itself, then perhaps he has finally found the rest that eluded him across ages of conflict. Of course, Tears of the Kingdom complicates this by revealing that an actual Ganondorf still existed beneath Hyrule Castle, that the calamity was merely his malice leaking from his imprisoned form. But even this eventually leads to an ending, the transformation into the demon dragon and the destruction of that dragon, an ending so complete that not even consciousness remains. What would true freedom have looked like for Ganondorf? The games never show us because the curse never permits it. But we can imagine, can extrapolate from those brief moments of peace at his various ends. Freedom would have been the wind of Hyrule blowing across the Gerudo Desert, bringing moisture and life instead of scorching heat. It would have been the ability to rule his people without the weight of destiny and curse pressing down on every decision. It would have been the choice to pursue cooperation instead of conquest without that choice feeling impossible or wrong. Freedom would have been being born without the mark of Demise's hatred, growing up as simply a king of the Gerudo rather than a foreordained demon. It would have been having genuine relationships not twisted by manipulation and betrayal, forming alliances based on mutual benefit rather than schemes for conquest. It would have been the ability to die naturally, peacefully, surrounded by people who mourned his passing rather than celebrated his defeat. Most fundamentally, freedom would have been the ability to write his own story rather than playing a part in a drama scripted thousands of years before his birth. It would have been genuine choice, real agency, the capacity to determine his own purpose rather than serving the purpose that Demise's curse laid upon him. These freedoms were denied to Ganondorf in life. The best he could hope for were moments of freedom in ending, those brief instants when death finally came, and with it release from the cycle. The wind blowing as consciousness fades, the weight of the Triforce of Power lifting from his hand, the transformation into dragon erasing even the possibility of future resurrection. These endings, however violent or tragic, represented the only escape available from a prison that had bound him since before he was born. And perhaps this is the ultimate tragedy of Ganondorf's story, that freedom and death became synonymous for him, that the only release from his curse was the obliteration of his existence, that peace came only in ending. A life spent seeking power and control, and in the end, the greatest power he could achieve was the power to finally stop, to rest, to be released from the terrible burden of being Demise's incarnate hatred. The cycle may or may not be over. Different timelines end differently, and even when Ganondorf seems permanently defeated, the nature of the curse suggests that some form of the conflict might continue. But for the individual incarnations of Ganondorf we have encountered, for the man who coveted the wind, for the king imprisoned beneath the castle, for the dragon whose consciousness was destroyed, there have been endings. Not necessarily the endings they would have chosen, not the freedom they might have wanted, but endings nonetheless. And in those endings, in those final moments when the weight lifts and the wind blows and consciousness fades into darkness, perhaps Ganondorf finally experiences what he could never have in life, a moment without the curse, without the burden, without the endless cycle, a moment of simply being before ceasing to be, a moment of freedom, however brief, before the eternal rest that had been denied him for so long finally, mercifully, arrives. Closing thoughts. As we come to the end of our journey through Ganondorf's cursed existence, let us return to where we began, to the question of what it means to be born into a destiny you never chose, to live a life constrained by forces beyond your control, to reach for freedom while chained to fate itself. Ganondorf's story is not a simple tale of good versus evil. It is a tragedy in the classical sense, the story of a figure who might have been great becoming instead a symbol of destruction, not entirely through his own choices, but through a combination of circumstance, influence, and supernatural curse that makes sorting out responsibility and blame nearly impossible. He is the king of the Gerudo, who wanted something better for his people, but somehow lost sight of that goal in his pursuit of personal power. He is the incarnation of ancient hatred, who nonetheless shows flashes of genuine humanity. He is the demon king who, in his final moments, appreciates the simple beauty of wind on his face. He is powerful enough to threaten entire kingdoms, but not powerful enough to break free from the cycle that defines him. The curse of Demise ensures that Ganondorf will always be the villain of this story, always be opposed by the hero and princess, always be defeated and sealed away or destroyed, only to return and repeat the cycle. But understanding the curse doesn't make Ganondorf any less responsible for his actions, and understanding his responsibilities doesn't make the curse any less tragic. Both truths exist simultaneously, creating a moral complexity that resists easy resolution. Perhaps that's fitting. Perhaps the most honest way to view Ganondorf is as a figure who embodies contradictions. Victim and villain, powerful and imprisoned, making choices and yet not free, deserving both pity and condemnation, depending on which aspect of his existence you focus upon. He is what he is because of forces beyond his control, and yet he becomes what he becomes through choices he himself makes. The curse opens the door to darkness, but he walks through it. What makes his story meaningful in the larger context of the Legend of Zelda series is how it deepens and complicates the central conflict. Without Ganondorf, without his motivations, his moments of reflection, his flashes of humanity, the battle between light and darkness would be simpler, cleaner, less interesting. Link would be fighting a mindless evil rather than a person shaped by circumstances and curse into something terrible. The victory would feel less earned, less meaningful, less morally complex. But with Ganondorf as he exists in the games, as someone who reaches for understandable goals through increasingly terrible means, who shows moments of awareness about his own tragedy while never quite being able to escape it, who dies again and again seeking rest that the curse won't grant, the conflict takes on weight and depth. We understand that defeating him is necessary, but we might also understand that his existence is itself a kind of suffering, that his villainy is not entirely of his own making, that the cycle that traps him traps everyone involved. As you drift towards sleep, consider the wind that Ganondorf coveted, not the scorching desert wind that brought death, nor the freezing night wind that stole warmth, but the gentle wind of Hyrule that carried life and possibility. Consider how something as simple as wind, as basic as a breath of air, could come to represent everything he desired and could never have. Consider how, in the end, as the Master Sword claimed him for the final time, that wind finally reached him, bringing not life but peace, not possession but release. The curse that bound Ganondorf may or may not be broken. The cycle may or may not continue in some form. But for the incarnations we have met, for the men who carried the weight of ancient hatred while retaining fragments of their own humanity, there have been endings. Not always the endings they deserved, not always the endings that would seem just, but endings nonetheless. And in those endings, perhaps, they found the freedom that eluded them in every moment of their existence. If you've enjoyed drifting through this story tonight, consider subscribing for more quiet journeys through Nintendo's worlds. Until next time, may your own choices be truly your own. May your destinies be of your making, and may whatever winds blow in your life bring growth rather than devastation, possibility rather than constraint. Good night.